I recently made an impulse purchase during the Native Instruments Summer of Sound sale and got myself a Maschine Micro. I'm honestly not completely sure why I got it. I have the tendency to collect controller hardware and then never use it, but I always wanted to have a machine and it was reasonably priced. So here we have it. Now, whenever I buy something, the first question I always ask myself is, can I use this with Dolby Atmos? And this is what I want to talk about today. So here are the three fundamental questions. First, can we produce Dolby Atmos within the Maschine ecosystem? Second, if we can, is this going to be difficult to set up? And third, is this going to be expensive? And since this video exists, it might not come as a big surprise to you that the answers to these questions are yes, we can. Second, no, it's not difficult to set up. And third, surprisingly, it doesn't cost a dime. So with that being said, let's get started with creating a Dolby Atmos machine. So let's open up the Maschine software, and I'm only using the software today because everything that we need to do actually we do within the software, and controlling that from the hardware is actually relatively straightforward. So if you are used to working with the machine, this should not be that big of a deal. Now, what I have here is simply a session that comes with the factory selection if you purchase the Maschine soft/hardware. Let's have a brief listen what we have here. So as you can see, or as you can hear, a relatively straightforward groove. Now, if you've never worked with Maschine, the workflow in Maschine is slightly unusual. What we have here is the so-called ideas window. And in the ideas window, we can define the individual grooves. These individual grooves consist of individual clips. And these clips are on individual groups, and these groups then contain individual sounds. So what we have here are 4 groups to 16 sounds each, and that's essentially how everything is constructed. And you can then take these clips and turn it into an arrangement as well. Now, in order to turn it into Dolby Atmos, what we need to do is we need to funnel these sounds into something that can turn them into Dolby Atmos. And for that purpose, we're going to use a group or a set of plugins that can do that, and this is going to be the Fiedler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer. And if you've never heard of that, I'm going to leave a link in the description below. It's essentially a system that allows you to turn pretty much anything in any digital audio workstation, including Maschine, into a Dolby Atmos project. Now, the nice thing about the Fiedler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer is that it comes in 2 versions, an essential version and a full version, and the essential version is completely free. So if you want to test what I'm doing here, you can simply download the essential version and get going. Now, there are a couple of things that the essential versions cannot do that I'm going to do today, and I'm going to point them out. But in general, almost everything that I'm going to do, you can simply do with the free version of the Dolby Atmos Composer. So let's do that. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to take the actual Dolby Atmos Composer plugin and put that onto our master bus or master track. So we're going to go into the master section here, and what we're going to do is we're going to add the Fiedler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer, and this will then essentially open up the Dolby Atmos Composer. And if you've ever worked with Dolby Atmos, you know the drill. We have 128 channels in Dolby Atmos. The first 10 channels are the so-called bed channels, and the remaining 118 are the object channels. And if we now play the audio, we are not going to hear anything, and the reason for that is because the Dolby Atmos Composer essentially requires you to route the audio into the Dolby Atmos Composer via the Dolby Atmos Beam plugins. So for each sound that we want to have in the Dolby Atmos Composer or in our Dolby Atmos project, we need to add a Dolby Atmos Beam plugin. And we can do that on any level that Maschine allows us to do. So we can do that on the sound level, or we can do that on the group level. Let's maybe start with the sound level. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a Dolby Atmos Beam plugin here to the first sound here. This is the kick. So let's do that. Here we have Fiedler Audio, and we're going to add a Dolby Atmos Beam plugin, and then let's play the sound. At that point, we should hear the kick, and we can actually see that the Dolby Atmos Composer has now seen that track coming in, and it's sending it into the first 2 channels of the Dolby Atmos bed. The way I've set it up is that by default, it assumes a 9.1.6 Atmos bed. It's not really an Atmos bed, it's more a composite bed. That's the way Fiedel Audio calls it, because Atmos beds are technically only 7.1.2, but the Fiedel Audio Dolby Atmos Composer allows you to go beyond that by through a little trick, and we're going to actually see that a little bit later when we are using when we are going to listen to the final output in the Dolby Atmos renderer. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch that over to an object, and if I switch that over to an object, it will come in at the channels 11 and 12, and this now essentially makes that into actually a pair of objects in Dolby Atmos. Now, let me open up the Dolby Atmos Beam plugin, and in the Dolby Atmos Beam plugin, what we can do is we can, first of all, we can do the same thing that we just did. We can change the pan mode from objects to composites, which once again would be the Dolby Atmos bed in Dolby Atmos Speak. And then we can change the position of our individual objects. Now, the nice thing about Maschine is that all the main parameters that we need are actually immediately visible in the first page of our kind of macro window here. So if we select the Dolby Atmos Beam plugin, we have all the controls that we need. We have the volume control, and we're going to actually need that in a second. We have the spread control. This allows us to change the size of the object. And let me just move that over here. If I'm increasing the size, and you might not see that because that's a little difficult to see. So this is kind of creates these little clouds here. That essentially means that the object size has increased. And then we can change the azimuth for the first channel and the second channel. The first channel is the left channel. The second channel is the right channel. And we already see that the azimuth, which is the horizontal direction, is slightly to the left. So if we want to kind of move that even further to the left, we can do that, and that will essentially move the object to more to the left. Or we can also move it upwards by changing the elevation. And we can do all kinds of things with it. We can also change the distance. The distance is essentially how far the object is away from the listener. So if I'm changing the distance, it will actually move that object closer to the listener. And that is actually really convenient, and that is also very convenient to access via the hardware controller. And then obviously also what you can do is you can simply automate those and kind of set up your session that way. Now, in order to get a full Dolby Atmos project, what I would now need to do is simply add beam plugins to each individual sound. Now, this will become a little much because we have, once again, 16 sounds per group, and we have 4 groups, so quite a bit of sounds that we have there. But what we can do is, instead of putting the Dolby Atmos Beam plugin onto the sound, we can actually also put that onto the group. So for the remaining sounds that we have in that group, let's just put the Dolby Atmos Beam plugin on the group itself. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up the group, and I'm going to add the Dolby Atmos Beam plugin here. And this one I'm actually going to leave as a composite. So if I'm opening the Dolby Atmos Composer now, I can see that I have the two kind of channels coming, or the 2 tracks coming in. The one was the kick track, and the other one was everything else in that particular group. And everything else is essentially now coming in as a 9.1.6 bed or composite in Dolby Atmos in Fiedel Audio Speak, and the kick is coming in as an object. Now, if I play that now, you will hear that the kick is actually now routed into the Dolby Atmos Composer twice. And that's something that we need to fix. So let's just kind of listen to that. So you might hear that the kick is a little dominant, and the reason the kick is dominant is simply because it's routed in there twice. And the reason it's routed in there twice is very straightforward. The Dolby Atmos Beam plugin sits on the individual sound, so it's routed from there into the sound, and then there's a second Beam plugin on the group, and that routes the entire group into the Dolby Atmos Composer as well. So technically, we now have the kick routed in there twice, and this is something that we need to fix. Now, the way to fix this is actually fairly straightforward. What we need to do is we need to go into the mixer settings, and in the mixer settings, let me go back to the sound here, and in the mixer settings, what we have here is we can select how much audio is passed on into the group. So if I'm now playing the sound, now first of all, if I'm just pressing the mute button, That's not going to kind of do what I want, because that's just going to mute the sound completely. What I want to do instead is I want to not send any sound into the group itself. So I'm going to simply send the slider here to 0. And that now makes sure that the kick is not sent into the group, but because there's a Beam plugin on that particular sound, it's sent into the Dolby Atmos Composer. And if you now open up the Dolby Atmos Composer, I see that it's coming in here. So the kick is coming here in here on channels 17 and 18, and everything else is coming in here in the first 16 channels. Now at the moment we don't really have a lot of things going on in channels 3 to 16, and that is because we have not really moved that around much. So let's just go into the group and let's maybe change the azimuth slightly and the elevation, and same thing here. And maybe the spread. So if we now go back into the Dolby Atmos Composer, we now see that all the 16 channels are essentially in the the signal sent into all 16 channels. So, and I now can simply continue on putting Beam plugins to whatever sound I want to send into the Dolby Atmos Composer. And for this particular example, what I'm simply going to do is I'm going to put Beam plugins on the 3 remaining groups. So let's just go back to the group and let's add a Beam plugin here. And let's maybe kind of move that up a little. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to kind of move these 2 up slightly, and then we have the second one, and let's do the same thing here, and let's do the Beam plugin, and let's maybe kind of move that a little bit to the left and to the right without changing the elevation. And then the final one, we are also going to do a Beam plugin here, Fiddler Audio Beam, and for this one I'm simply going to increase the spread, and let's hear what we have so far. So let's go into the master and open up the Dolby Atmos Composer again. Now what I'm going to do is for the remaining 3 I'm simply going to switch them over to objects. Oopsie, I didn't want to do that, so that's an object. And that's how we can turn a project in Maschine or a session in Maschine into a session that is Dolby Atmos. And obviously we can do now everything that we can do in Maschine. We can use the hardware controller in order to control the position of those objects and everything else. And we can, essentially, because we have already set up everything, we can simply kind of work with a different groove. So if I play that sound and I switch over to a different groove, it will do exactly that on the Dolby Atmos Composer. And everything works just fine. Or if I go to the third groove, well, you get the picture. So now I have everything in Maschine. So there are 2 questions now that I need to answer. The first one is, how do I export everything so that I get a Dolby Atmos master file? And the second question is, if I want to monitor everything not in stereo, but in a full immersive environment. So for example, I have a Dolby Atmos Studio that is 7.1.2, or maybe I'm doing a live event and I have a very complex speaker setup, a speaker layout, and I want to address that. How can I do that? And those are all things that are very straightforward to do. And this is what we're going to do next. Before I continue, a quick reminder, if you have enjoyed this video so far, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions or comments, please either use the comment section below or join us on our Discord server. The invite link is in the description. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by becoming a member either through YouTube or Patreon. There's also a free membership option on Patreon. You can also use one of the affiliate links below or buy some of my In Immersion We Find Presence merch, like this coffee mug, for example. Links are in the description as well. All contributions to this channel are used to purchase the software and hardware I talk about on this channel. And with that being said, let's go back to do some weird stuff with our machine. So let's first talk about how we can export everything into Dolby Atmos master file, because that is probably one of the main reasons we wanted to go into Dolby Atmos in the first place. And that is actually very straightforward to do by using the export function in the Dolby Atmos Composer. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up the Dolby Atmos Composer. And in the Dolby Atmos Composer, the things that we need to do is we need to set the in point and the out point. So essentially, we need to tell the Dolby Atmos Composer where the audio starts and where the audio ends. And there are different ways on how you can do that. If you have an arrangement, for example, you can simply kind of move the position kind of to that particular space where you want that audio to start and where you want that audio to end. And then you simply kind of go into the Dolby Atmos Composer and simply set in point, set out point. But you can also do that manually. So, for example, if you are doing that during a live session, so if you want to kind of just record your live session, you can actually do that by simply setting an in point to be 0 and then maybe an out point to be whatever time you want to have. Now, be aware that Dolby Atmos master files tend to be very large, so I would probably not kind of use a large kind of a number here, but if you want to record like a 5-minute or 10-minute session, you can definitely do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to simply set that to 20, and that should kind of be plenty for us to just for a test. And then I'm going to simply press the export button. As soon as I press the export button, it will tell me where to export the audio to, and I'm going to export it to my desktop, and I'm going to call that test. I'm going to say save, and at that point, it is now essentially kind of telling me that it is ready to export. So what I need to do now is I need to start the audio, and I need to start it at 0 because otherwise the Dolby Atmos Composer doesn't know where to start. So I'm going to simply start everything from the very beginning. And as you can see, it is exporting at that point. Okay, and now the export is successful. Now, one thing that I should point out that in order to be able to monitor simultaneously as exporting, you actually need to have the full version of the Dolby Atmos Composer. So if you want to use that for recording a live session where you definitely need to monitor as you're recording, you actually need to have the full version. So this, what I just did, only works on the full version. If you have the free version, you would not hear the audio while it is exporting. You could still export, but you would not hear the audio. And that means that we now have the test file here as a Dolby Atmos master file, and that means that we should now simply check if that Dolby Atmos master file is actually a Dolby Atmos master file. So let me open up the Dolby Atmos renderer, and way too many software here. So here we have the renderer, so let's open that up. And let's just make sure that everything is set in the preferences. So in my case, I need to set that to where we Rodecaster, here we are, accept. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the master file that I have here, which is the test master file. I'm opening it up. And let's see if it is playing. And as we can see, everything is playing correctly. Now, if you paid attention, you might notice that I have a lot more objects here than I actually put into the system. If you remember, we had 3 object pairs, so there are actually 6 objects, but I see a lot more objects. And the reason I see more objects is simply because in the Dolby Atmos Composer, only the first 10 channels are the traditional Dolby Atmos bed, and what the Fiddle Audio Composer is doing is it's taking channels 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 as additional object channels to augment the Dolby Atmos bed. That's why it's called a composite. It consists both of the bed channels and some object channels to augment that. And you will see those objects in the Dolby Atmos renderer, because the Dolby Atmos renderer doesn't know what a composite is. It would simply think that is an object, and that's fine. So that's why you see not 8 objects, you actually see a total of 14 objects in the Dolby Atmos renderer. So that's all nice, but even though I'm creating Dolby Atmos, I'm actually only listening to it in stereo or in binaural to be exact. What if I already have a 7.1.4 studio and I want to monitor everything in 7.1.4? Now there is a way to do that. It is a little bit hit and miss, so just be aware that in your setup it might work or it might not work. But the Fiddle Audio Dolby Atmos Composer has the option to address an external output and route the audio from the Dolby Atmos Composer directly into your device instead of going through Maschine. And this is essentially what we're going to do now. Now, I'm only working with the stereo setup here, so I have to create a virtual 9.1.6 studio setup, and I'm going to do that with a binaural renderer, which is Virtuoso. If you've been watching my channel, you know that I really like Virtuoso. It is essentially exactly what it is, what I just said. It is a software that takes in a multi-channel audio and kind of converts it into binaural, and I've set it up to take in a 9.1.6 signal. Now, this particular software I'm currently using on a Mac. You can do the same thing on Windows. It's just a little bit different, but this is really just for demonstration purposes in case you want to know how to address a multi-channel output. And this will create me, or this will kind of give me that multi-channel, that virtual multi-channel output. Now, I just need to make sure that in the options I have everything set correctly. So once again, the output is the Rodecaster so that you guys hear something, and the input is going to be the Loopback 16-channel device. This is a Loopback device, and I'm going to use that in lieu of my multi-channel output. So I'm going to send audio into that Loopback device through the Dolby Atmos Composer, and it is going to arrive at Virtuoso. And then Virtuoso is going to do binaural rendering instead of the Dolby Atmos Composer directly. So that's everything that I've set up here. I've set it up to 9.1.6 because I can. Why not? And then I'm going to go into Maschine. And in Maschine, what I need to do in the Dolby Atmos Composer, I need to set the external output. Well, first of all, let me kind of turn that to 9.1.6. And then let's turn off headphone mode. What I would now hear if I play the audio is I would hear the first two channels, the left and the right channel. So let's just play the audio. And most of the audio is actually kind of, I moved to the back, so I'm not going to hear that right now because once again, I'm just going to hear the first two. And this is actually a little bit hot. So let me just reduce the audio slightly. Yeah, I think that works. Okay. So let's do the audio again. So what I now need to do is I need to set the external output. So I want to actually send that into Virtuoso, or if you're working with a multi-channel studio, into your multi-channel audio device. And I can do that here with the external output. And for this external output, I need to send it into the Loopback device. Now, be aware that this can be a little bit tricky. So kind of there are a couple of settings that you can play around with. So let's just see what we hear. Now, currently, the way it is set up is I'm actually going to hear the signal twice because it once going through the regular output of Maschine into my headphones and then also through the external output into Virtuoso, and it's going to be rendered there. So I'm actually going to have the signal twice with a little delay. So it's not going to sound very good. So let's just play that just so that you see what we have here. So it's once again, it's a little bit all over the place. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we don't hear the signal coming from Maschine. And a couple of different ways we can do. We could simply put a plugin after the Dolby Atmos Composer that kind of mutes the master channel here. That's one way to go. But another way to go is simply go into the settings and just choose an audio device that doesn't really go anywhere. So in our particular case, what I could do, for example, let's just put that into, I don't know, the Pro Tools Bridge sounds good. So let's use that, whatever you have. And that essentially means that it's now sent into the Pro Tools Bridge. That is not connected to anything. So the audio from Maschine is not going anywhere. And if I play that now, I should actually hear the audio. Now, once again, that can be a little bit hit and miss because sometimes, kind of what we're really doing is we're tricking Maschine, or we're kind of bypassing everything, and we're tricking Maschine into doing something that is actually not designed to do, because one plugin actually kind of takes over the external output, and sometimes the system doesn't want that. So let's just see what we have here. And it actually works well. So it's now coming in at Virtuoso. And what I could do here, for example, I could implement heads tracking if I wanted to do other things. But this works actually quite well. And once again, if you have a multi-channel studio with a 9.1.4 setup, or maybe even a 9.1.6 setup, or a traditional 7.1.4 setup, then you can use that in order to kind of address that directly. Just once again, a little word of warning, because we are really bypassing what machine is intended to do in terms of output. You might need to play around with the buffer settings a little in order to make that work. But other than that, generally it works quite well. And this is really super convenient. The one thing that I really like is that in the Beam plugin, you immediately have the parameters available. So if you're working with the hardware, this is actually extremely easy to integrate into a machine setup. So when I kind of started to look how we could do Dolby Atmos with machine, I was actually surprised by how convenient that workflow is. It's actually amazingly simple to do. And it's very usable and very flexible, and you can do live sets with that. You can record live sets with that. You can do all kinds of things with it and have fun with it. So this is really neat. And that's everything I wanted to say today. Thanks again for watching my videos. I truly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section below or join us on our Discord server for a chat. And with that being said, see you all in the next video.